We just finished a campaign for our church, and a lot of people do capital campaigns. Well, we did an evangelism campaign.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Intentional Churches podcast. We are here to give you practical wisdom and insight into leading your church and aligning your team and your people to the Great Commission. And we have an amazing conversation coming up, but before we jump in, I just want to remind you that the Intentional Churches Conference is coming up April 29th and 30th in Louisville, Kentucky. At IC, we believe the Great Commission should be a personal mission statement for everyone in your church, beginning with you, the leader, and your team. This conference is uniquely designed to inspire personal growth and alignment back to the Great Commission. So make sure you visit intentionalchurches.com/podcast for details and to register there. Well, we've got a fantastic episode today. And as usual, I'm joined by my good friend, Doug Parks. What's up, Doug? Good to be with you.
You too, Erin. Great to be with you in the new year.
That's right. And we have a new friend with us today. His name is Mark. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Mark, why don't you give us just a little bit, just introduce yourself to us? Give us a little bit of context. Who are you? Where are you? What should we know about Mark Ashton?
Gosh, well, I'm sitting here in my little office in Omaha, Nebraska. So one of the most unlikeliest places to find cool things, but I found it's a city of hidden treasures. I've been here for 19 years, and I serve as the lead minister of Christ Community Church. Our church is 103 years old, and it's a historic Christian Missionary Alliance church, but it's kind of got the unique distinctive that it's also a thriving 5-generation, evangelistic, missional, doing a lot of really fun things kind of a church. And so I get the joy of leading an old but flourishing church. I got 4 kids. And before I was here, I was evangelism director at Willow Community Church in the Chicago suburbs. And before that, InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, I served as an evangelism specialist. So 34 years, I've been doing intentional evangelism and missions types of things, and learned a few lessons along the way.
I can't wait, Mark. We're going to have a fun conversation. I can tell already with just your emphasis on evangelism. Our listeners are all very convicted and fired up around this idea of relational evangelism. So look forward to this.
Mark, why don't you said you're located in Omaha, which you said has hidden gems along the way. Why don't you just give us a little bit of context for where you are? Like what's it like to both live in Omaha, but really to do ministry in Omaha? Just give us some context for your city.
Yeah, so Omaha, the metro of Omaha is 929,000 people, so it's a significantly large city. It's about half of the population of Nebraska. Most people don't know, but we're all the way on the far right edge, the far eastern edge, right along the Missouri River. And it's a place that I would say spiritually has a lot of fun things to it. We're a place that I would call has a very fat fringe. So a lot of people who self-identify as Christians and a much smaller number that actually practice their faith. So, we would have about 18% of the city that's in church on a Sunday morning, but 70% that would say they'd identify as Christians or Catholics or Lutherans or whatever their background may be. So a huge amount of that fat fringe is probably not authentic followers of Jesus. They're just people who don't know what to call themselves. So that's where they put themselves. It's a city that's, for me, a lot of the hidden gems of it is it's a low cost of living, but high income, high education, low on crime. It's one of the best places to live. And we've got a lot of awesome people that are in Omaha. And from my perspective, from what I can tell, we've got about 500,000 people in Omaha who certainly have not bowed the knee to Jesus. And so when we ask what's our mission field locally, we identify those 500,000 people who don't know Jesus, and that's who we're trying to reach.
That's interesting, man. I'll tell you what's kind of fun. I live in Las Vegas, and in my neighborhood, you would not believe I've got like 5 or 6 people who went to Creighton Law on my street.
Oh, no kidding!
They're all Omahaites, and man,
it's a great law school. Another great hidden treasure in Omaha.
Yeah, my very next door neighbor, the husband and the wife, he's in the public defender's office, and I think she's a judge now. Or both went to Creighton Law. They've always got their Blue Jay. Is that right?
The Blue Jays, yeah, we're
Yeah,
season ticket holders to Blue Jay basketball,
nice.
and they're often at the top of the Big East, so that's a fun thing.
I'm curious, Mark. We're really this season trying to settle into this idea of across the country. We've talked to like senior pastor of a church out on Long Island in the East, and a few others where we're trying to get our head around like how to reach people in different segments of the current culture. And I'm curious, when you use this term "fat fringe,"
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to assume, but I'm implying in that a lot of people, if they were connecting with somebody around Jesus, would say, "Well, I already know him." And so, how do you? I know we're going to unpack more of this as we go, but how do you help your people, especially for some of our listeners who are in the Bible Belt or the Midwest, and they're trying to fire up their people to reach their friends, neighbors, and coworkers? How do you help people move beyond in training that first wave of I kind of already know Jesus, even, or maybe I have a different definition. Maybe we should start at give us a better definition of fat fringe. Maybe I have assumed too much.
Yeah, I think there's some people who are non-Christians and know they're non-Christians, and
Right.
there's some people who are non-Christians because they don't understand what a Christian is. They'd say I identify as a Christian because I'm a generally moral person, or because I go to church twice a year, or because that's what my parents were. And we would say people who don't understand the gospel but identify as Christians, well, we're trying to reach them just as much as people who know for sure that they're not Christians. Then, of course, there's a marginal group of people who are saved, but, like Paul says, as escaping through the flames. They're barely in. And, of course, we want to disciple them as well. But part of the challenge is you don't know which people are which on your first encounters. And so sometimes you have to help get people unsaved before you can get them saved. And that comes from having a perspective of, oh, that's what it means to be a Christian. I didn't know that. And the best strategy that we oftentimes train people in is if somebody is claiming to be a Christian, don't challenge them, assume the best. And say, you know what? Oh, well, then you would agree that the Bible is worth reading. And are you in a place that you're studying? Have you ever checked out Jesus for yourself? Have you ever read the Gospels? And put it from a position of the more we can be allies rather than arguing when it comes to the gospel, the better it is. And if somebody else is establishing common ground, my thought is assume the best on what they say and then use that as a bridge to have the next step in your conversation. I find that there's an awful lot of people out there who have some kind of religious background, some kind of hunger, some kind of yearning for God, that if somebody just asks them, hey, are you interested in checking this out more? Would you like to have a conversation? Would you like to be in a Bible discussion? The openness is much bigger than most Christians give them credit for. And in a city like ours with a fat fringe, where there's a lot of people who would say, oh, yeah, that's true of me, well, it just makes an easier invitation to make the next step.
Yeah, I love the the posture to assume the best and to assume that it's not our job to convince people or to say you aren't a follower of Jesus or So I just love assuming that someone is what they say they are and inviting them along the way to take next steps. I just think that's a good approach rather than training people to say, well, if they don't say these things, then they must not be a follower of Jesus. I think that's really good. Doug, what were you going to add?
I'm torn, Mark, with it because I want to talk about this network of churches too. But yeah, let's swing over there for a moment, and then I want to come back to the evangelism side, especially with your experience. So, tell us a little bit more about this network. I think it's called Within Reach. Is that right?
Yep.
And tell our listeners about what that is, how it got started. Kind of what you're doing now, and just help us understand it a little bit.
Yeah, here's how it got started for us. I came 19 years ago to Omaha, Nebraska, and the calling that I sensed on my life was not to build a bigger, better, faster church, but to reach the lost with the good news of Jesus. And that creates a whole different paradigm in your mind. So I started asking the question, what if we get really, really good at being an evangelistic church and reach as many people as we can, and we do that every year for 30 years, will we get the job done? And the answer is not even close. There's no way that one church can reach 500,000 people. So then I began asking, okay, well, what if we multi-site? Can we build more sites and reach the city that way? And the answer is no, not even close. Then you get to, what if we plant churches that plant churches? Can we eventually reach the city? And you go, okay, that's a better multiplier, but it's still not going to reach the city. The only way that I could calculate actually being able to accomplish the mission of reaching the city where every single person is within one friend who knows the gospel and can present the good news of Jesus to them in a way they can understand it is if we mobilize all of the healthy churches in Omaha who love Jesus and believe the gospel to be being highly evangelistic and planting churches that plant churches. If we do that, then the math works, and you can reach 500,000 people within a generation.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Omaha, one of the advantages is we had churches that had good relationships with each other. By 2015 or so is about the time that we started jumping onto this. I had already been meeting with pastors for about 10 years, having lunches, praying together. There were good relationships that were out there, and we even collaborated on a few things along the way. But I sat down with a group of them and I said, guys, there's 4 things that I would love for us to be able to say we're going to collaborate on together. So, number 1, reaching lost people. Number 2, planting churches. Number 3, unleashing unprecedented compassion on our city. And number 4 is developing leaders that will do the same thing. And I think we can do those 4 things better together than we could if we're doing it separately. I think we can share best practices. I think we can inspire each other. I think we can make conferences in Omaha for Omaha people way cheaper and more efficiently than sending our people to the cool conferences that happen around the United States, only if we do it together. And so, I cast this vision to about 5 of the largest church pastors here in Omaha, and all of them said, okay, let's start this month. Let's go. I mean, it was not a hard sales pitch. It wasn't difficult. We had relationships. We were on the same mission, and they're like, what do we do? Let's go. Now, once you have the top 5 or 6 churches that are most influential in the city on board, then you mobilize them to be inviting their friends. And pretty soon we had about a network of 30 churches who were some of the most influential churches in the city to do it. That was in 2016. We've grown to about 60 churches right now. And what we do is we meet together 3 times a year for lunch. We have one collaborative conference every year. We're having Michael Frost and John Ortberg in this year to have a conference on that. And then we have sub-networks of people with youth ministry and worship ministry and city reaching ministry who all know each other. And we're always asking the question, what can we do better together than we could do separately? And so we're inspiring each other to plant churches and reach the lost and unleash compassion on the city.
That is amazing. And Mark, we need to talk more because I need to learn from what you guys have done. In essence, that is what we've done with intentional churches nationally. It's about 1,000 churches now across 30 denoms, all anchored in reaching lost people.
Yeah.
And as a byproduct, if we reach those lost people, believing that church planting is a natural byproduct if we're reaching the people in our communities. So that is fascinating that you've created that in Omaha across the board. In fact, it's interesting to me. I think one of the things our listeners, if I'm in their shoes, I'd be interested in, as we've gone through this over the last 12, 14 years that we've been doing this work, one of the things we've learned in a lot of cities, there is actually, they would never say it this way, but church competition. And our premise has been the work of God is dynamic. If multiple believers are practicing the Great Commission in their lives, there may be multiple believers in a lost person's life. And therefore, in each congregation's what we call relational reach zone or relational footprint is a little different. And when you're thinking about 500,000 people and reaching them, that's how you have to think. Like there's overlaps and all these things. I'm just curious what you would say to our listeners who say, I live in a city where actually churches don't collaborate and they don't work together, or there's one humongous mega church that kind of dominates everybody and everybody's afraid of their next multi-site being in their backyard or something. How do you address that in Omaha, and how would you coach our listeners on fighting through if they're experiencing that feeling of church competition in them?
Yeah, we did have an advantage where we started off with relationships in play. And I would say that it does start with some key leaders getting around the table with each other. I think in order for something like this to work in a city, you have to have at least one of the large churches who says, I'm in and I'm willing to start the ball rolling. And that was us at Christ Community. We're not the far and ahead largest church in the city. There's a number of 3,000 person churches or so that are here in the city that we just got all of them on board at the same time, and that created a pathway for everyone to get on. But it really does start with having some lunches and building trust with people and welcoming folks in. And pretty soon, when you just ask questions like, "What are you doing for Easter?" you realize we are all on the same mission. We're trying to do the same things. We can learn from each other and grow. And then you can invite other people in once there's a trust that's been built, usually among some of the more influential churches that are there. If you're someone who says, "Well, I'm from a small church or a non influential church," I would say start where you're at with churches that are of similar size or similar denomination and build trust in that direction, and just see how God blows wind into that from the perspective of, hey, we're going to punch at our weight class and move at the level that God has given us authority over, and just take your next steps that way.
Would you mind sharing just a story or two of what is the good you're seeing from this collaboration? What kind of, I hesitate to use the word results, because you're not doing this for maybe a particular outcome, but just share a story or two of the good that's emerging from this kind of collaboration.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of statistics, and then I'll share some stories. For me, one of the things that we want to see happen is we would love to see churches reaching 7% of the people on their Sunday morning attendance would be baptized in a current year. And so we're measuring that to say, man, if we could make that happen citywide, that means all of the churches that we have in our network will double in 10 years. So if we say, okay, we're doubling in 10 years, plus at the same time we're planting churches, and everybody plants one church, and then they work to double every 10 years, that's how you get your exponential growth. And until COVID, now COVID, our statistics got all wonky, but until COVID, we were reaching exactly 7% per year, and our churches were growing at 7% per year. And so we were seeing that happening, but it was because we were cheering each other on, collaborating, inspiring each other's staff, sharing statistics, sharing best practices, etc. So that's one statistical side. Here's a more story side of something amazing that has happened in the last few years. There was a woman who was working with the Alpha course here in Nebraska. I'm sure you guys are familiar with that. And she started networking with some of the pastors. Well, it turns out that she was a Catholic woman who went to a Catholic church and loved Jesus, loved evangelism, loved the Alpha course. And she came to us and said, "There's some people in the Catholic church that you need to meet and talk to." So we said, okay, let's do it. So she had a party with some large Protestant evangelical pastors and some large church Catholic pastors, and said, priests, and said, "You guys get together and just talk about what you're doing." And my paradigm was blown away. We found that they were talking, they were using words like evangelism, and we need to be more missional, and we need to get higher biblical literacy in our people. And, the challenges with the Catholic Church are this. And I would go, that's exactly what I would say as well. And they've defined it and they're addressing it. And then they said, "Can we come to your evangelism training? Because we need to get better at training our people and sharing their faith." So I'm like, sure, come on out. And we had a train the trainer type of thing, and we were training people from different churches. Well, we had a dozen people from Catholic churches coming in to be trained on how do they train their people how to share their faith. And then when it came to implementation, it was actually the Catholic churches that did the best job. They had never had anything like this before. They had dozens of people showing up for their training. And I thought, man, if the Catholic Church wakes up to evangelistic effectiveness, some of it people reaching inside their church, some reaching outside of their church, it could be one of the most monumental changes that we see happening in our city. And these people have been great partners, great advocates, great learners, great implementers. Anyway, it's a fun factor that I never thought I would see happen in my lifetime, and God just dropped it in our laps.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I just want to say kudos to you guys in Omaha, because that is not what we find the norm. We find it in other places that are especially hard to reach places, like in Salt Lake City and Milwaukee, Wisconsin. There's a great network of churches there. But by and large, what you're describing, Mark, I think should be a vision cast for any of our listeners in their city or region, because our belief is it is at the ground between church leaders that will get there, leading people to this, not necessarily, I don't want to be too negative, but this thought leader, silver bullet, addictive kind of environment we're in church leadership sometimes. And so kudos to you all. I would like to, if I could, can we back up to your story a little bit? And where did your convictions around relational evangelism come from? Like, where did that get planted in you with such conviction that you've lived kind of a life influencing it, and now are influencing an entire city and a congregation, and everything else in it?
Yeah, the starting point really was when I went to college. I went to the University of Illinois, and I was raised in a church environment where I knew the right things. I had actually studied the Bible quite a lot, done a lot of apologetics, but I had rejected the faith as something that's plausible, livable, vibrant. And I was just at that 18-year-old age where narcissism is really attractive. And so I had been running away from God and living life my own way through my junior and senior of high school, my freshman year of college, and was really excited about my freshman year of college because I got away from parents and all constraints, and I could live fully hedonistic and have a ball. The problem was there was this guy who knew me from high school from my Christian group, and he kept bugging me to come to the intervarsity group. And so, because he was so nice and so outreach oriented, I went with him to the meetings. So, on Friday night, I'm going to InterVarsity. On Thursday and Saturday, I'm going to bars and fraternity parties and living the life. And eventually, my testimony is November of my freshman year, God got a hold of my life. I'm holding these things side by side. I knew that Jesus was true in my head, but I just needed to say, okay, I'm going to give up the sin side of my life and follow Jesus. But the place that left me is now I've got all of these friends from my fraternity and bar and dorm encounters who I really like. Like, they're really my friends and I really enjoy them. And we really did a lot of fun things together. But now I'm following Jesus and realizing all those guys are headed to a Christless eternity. And I just couldn't live with myself knowing that these like real live flesh and blood people who I knew and really liked didn't know Jesus. And so that was where I awkwardly started trying to share my faith with people. And I would say really poorly at first. My strength in Bible and apologetics was actually a detriment because I loved proving myself right and other people wrong, and quickly learned that that's not the best approach with folks. But, hit and miss. Eventually, the Holy Spirit was at work. And 1 month later, I got to lead my first friend on the dorm to faith in Jesus. That's where my addiction began. And I started saying, man, there's no other high stakes, high impact game in the world than sharing your faith. I mean, eternity hangs in the balance over this. So, because of that, I decided my sophomore year that I was going to try and lead a Bible discussion for the guys on my dorm floor. My InterVarsity staff member challenged me to do it. He taught me how to do it. And so I, maybe against my own better judgment, took the leap and asked people if they wanted to come. I was surprised how many people said yes, that they wanted to be a part of it. In fact, some of them were like, I've always wanted to be in a Bible study, and now I can be one with guys on the floor. And they came from all different spiritual backgrounds, and we would meet together every Tuesday night at 10:30 over a bowl of popcorn and talk about God until we were ready to go to bed. And it was amazing and fulfilling, and they asked great questions. And usually, maybe 2 people a year would actually place their faith in Jesus. It wasn't like there was a revolution that was going on. It was just incremental, helping people take their next step, answering the next question. And from there, I became an evangelism coordinator in my InterVarsity chapter, trained people to do these little Bible studies that I was doing on my dorm floor. And that actually became a movement within InterVarsity where, eventually a couple thousand people were doing these kinds of studies and leading their friends to Jesus. And it was very exciting. So that's where my origin story comes from.
Yeah, what I think is so important about your story is you were in relationship with people close to you but far from God. And you as you began to place your faith in Jesus, you began to see there are real people in my life who I love and care for that need to know what I know and need to have what I have. And I think that's so important, because if we aren't surrounded by people who don't follow Jesus, if we're just insulated in our Christian bubble, we won't have those names and faces like you had, I also, side note, love that your Bible study met at 10:30 p.m. It's so college.
It's so college.
I'm
yeah,
trying
that's
to
right.
imagine going to a 10:30 p.m. Bible study. That's like, wow, that's unreal.
Yeah, not at this age, but it was right at the time.
Yes. Mark, maybe. Oh, go ahead, Doug. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, I know, Mark, I don't know about you, but all of a sudden, I'm like finding myself, I go to bed between 8 and 9.
You need to have the 5 a.m. breakfast Bible study with the guys.
Yeah, there you go.
Yes. Sorry, Erin.
Mark, I'm just curious, you've had this passion for like relational evangelism since college, and you've held different roles, like you talked about earlier, all the way along the way that have kind of stirred evangelism all around you. As you think about your role as a lead pastor now, how are you helping your staff, your key leaders in your church, not just think about relational evangelism, but practice it? And then how is that seeping down into your congregation?
Yeah, great question. We just finished a campaign for our church, and a lot of people do capital campaigns. Well, we did an evangelism campaign at the church, and it was a 14-month initiative for us to say, hey, how can we get better at reaching one more? And it was really the very simple paradigm of each one reach one. Who's your one more? Who are you trying to reach out to? Well, that starts with the staff, and the staff have to each have their own one more. I think for the pastors that are out there listening to this, we all know that it's difficult to carve out time for lost people, because you've got hundreds of found people that are begging for your attention, and you have to say no to them in order to say no to people who don't know Jesus. And so we tried to create a culture within our staff where everybody has a one more. And on a weekly basis, you're praying with your supervisor for your one more. On maybe a monthly basis, we're praying together as a staff team where everybody's kind of mixing it up and praying for their one more. We're telling stories about that. When we baptize people, the stories come up on the screen related to that. So all of these things try to create a culture in that regard. We've had an evangelism curriculum that we've designed here, and all of our staff have been through that, and many of them are trainers on that. So as they're working training people, there's nothing more convicting about doing it personally than training other people and needing to have personal stories to tell them that come from your real, authentic life. And some of our ministries, like our college ministry, has goals of meeting with brand new people, lost or found people they've never met before. And so we try and put it inside the culture by having everyone have their part that's appropriate for whatever ministry role they have here at the church.
We use the language of Luke 15, the one within the intentional churches network of churches. So it's pretty cool overlaps, man. I think what I'm hearing in there is accountability in a way that's different than most people would hear the word accountability. Is that accurate? And if so, is that intentional? Like, or were you bringing account by praying for one more, switching it up, all this? Is that part of what you're doing, but you're doing it in a way that's not as oppressive as some people hear the word accountability?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great way of saying it. It's really very intentional reminders for people. I find that my staff and almost all church staff are good-hearted about this. They have really good intentions about wanting to reach lost people. They just need to be reminded to put it in their calendar. And praying together is not just effective because prayer is effective. It's also effective because it reminds you, oh, yeah, I should be contacting that person and making some intentional steps that way. Sunday mornings we'll pray for our one more as well. Sometimes we'll even have people hold their finger up and, pray for their one more and think about who that person is. All of those reminders are not only effective prayer, but they're great for intentionality. One of the things we did is we had a 30-day text stream for our church, and you could sign up for it if you wanted to have a reminder every day at 4 p.m. to pray for your one more. And our evangelism director, her name is Allison, would have a prompt every day that would come out via text. And it wasn't a forever kind of a text stream. It was just for 30 days. If you want to be more intentional about praying, you can do this. And then people would get a reminder to pray every single day. And that helps to stimulate the culture as well.
Loving these very simple, pragmatic steps you're taking to keep this top of mind. I use the phrase often, like, part of our job as leaders is just creating one awareness or one more awareness in us, in our people, and letting the Spirit take it from there. Sometimes training is not even needed once people are just, it's top of mind and the intentionality is there in life. I'm curious on the accountability side for staff, have you gone as far? Like, is some of this in all the way to job description, or is this more just the cultural and the values of the culture you've created in your staff?
That's a great question. I don't know if we've actually written it in on job descriptions, but it is an expectation. I think everyone would say, is it an expectation of your job that you have one more that you're praying for every single day? They do. We also, interestingly, at the beginning of the campaign, we handed out light bulbs in church, little LED light bulbs, and we had everyone take a Sharpie marker and write the name of their one more on a light bulb. And then we had these displays out in the hallway, and we screwed the light bulbs in, and praying that the light of Jesus will be entering into these people's lives. And that display stays up all year long. And so every one of our staff has a light bulb with a name on it that's in the light board. And to not do it would just be weird. I mean, we don't have to write it in their job description. It's just something that you go, this is something we're all doing and we're excited about, and it's our mission. And if you're not excited about it, why are, it would be weird to be here.
Going back to the network of churches, and kind of this emphasis on relational evangelism, how is the network? Is the network, and how is the network helping stir some of this emphasis on relational evangelism in churches across Omaha? Is that happening? Is that a place where this is being stirred? Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a few ways that it happens. One of them is we share the evangelism curriculum, which is a Reach One More is the name of the curriculum as well. It was developed here. We've shared it, trained people in churches all over the metro, and thousands of people have now been trained in their churches related to being able to do that. So that's one thing. A second thing is when we do these 3 times a year lunches, there's always somebody on stage that's kind of stirring you up to share your faith better. Last fall, the Art of Neighboring guy, what's his name? Do you guys know that book?
Yeah. I know it's on the, I know who you're talking about, but I can't think of his name.
Great guy, forget his name, but he was here, and he's awesome.
Life-changing guy, but
totally. And so I was really glad because I had like 40 of my staff there who are hearing the same exact thing that I would like to say to them, but they're hearing it from a different voice and a different perspective. And sometimes you just get the same message from a different person, and they're like, yeah, we should be doing that. And, as a lead pastor, you're like, yeah, we should be doing that.
Totally.
Inside you're going, we've been talking about that for years.
Right.
But I love to get my people exposed to different voices who are saying the same thing. And then some churches will share stories of strategies or wins that they've had, and that'll stimulate something else. One example that I'll give related to that is we launched a counseling center here called City Care Counseling. And it is designed intentionally to be the intersection of the best of psychology and the best of spirituality that get combined together in order to create life change. And what we found is that, I'm sure similar to everyone in your audience, anxiety, depression, mental illness is an all-time high. Well, because of that, it's a huge open door for the gospel. And we can have people that are paid by insurance companies and Medicare and other venues to be actually meeting with people and talking to them about Jesus for an hour a week. And the more we can do this, the better it could be. So we started that here, and then we said to other churches, man, if you have somebody who you'd like to have be a part of the network, this is what we're trying, this is what we're getting really good at. We'll take care of the back office services. You give them a free office, and the counselor is an independent contractor that makes their own money work. And that's multiplied into 56 counselors in 7 locations around Omaha. And because we shared that best practice at our Within Reach meetings, people were able to say, oh, we could do that. And then they get on board, and it just winds up multiplying. So that's just one example of a real practical way that we're reaching the city with the gospel through counseling. But other things will just rev up your engine to say, okay, I got to make this a priority again and get the staff 3 times a year plowing in the right direction.
That's great, man. I just love the practicality you're bringing to this episode of just little ideas for church leaders out there. Because we have a little bit of time, and Erin knows this, our listeners know this. I joke often I'm the old guy. I'm going to go, and Mark, I'm not going to put you in the same bucket as me, but you seem like you might be a Gen Xer as well.
I am. Yeah, I'm 56 if anyone cares.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you this question because you mentioned that you worked as the evangelist director at Willow Creek Community Church. And believe it or not, what I'm finding is a lot of our younger leaders out there in the U.S. right now don't all know about Willow Creek and that journey, or they only know about the negativity around Willow Creek over, from the last run. But one of the things I'd like to drill into just for a moment with you is, this is my opinion. Willow Creek and Saddleback, for a lot of the Gen Xers, was our practical ministry training ground. Like, our seminaries did not teach us how to lead at this level and how to evangelize. I had no classes in my seminary degree around evangelism. And so I learned a lot from Willow Creek. And in those early years of going to the Church Leadership Conference, the CLC, when it was smaller and in the smaller auditorium, I remember this story after story after story about real life relational evangelism happening at the ground at Willow across the leadership. There really was alignment there. So you fast forward generationally, all that goes down goes down. And I make the case, I think it is, we're part of the noise too. It's this content marketing and digital, trying to get people on board with your ideas or whatever. It's led to this kind of silver bullet thinking. And what I believe happened to Willow and this evangelistic emphasis, it got coined as the attractional model, and as if that were negative, and was creating something that was not okay. And if you move on from there in church history, I believe there's been some others model chasing where we've played down the model before us. So I'm saying all this to say to you, Mark, tell our listeners about what was the true essence, because I don't believe it was this negative rhetoric that's out there in church leadership about attractional being this, we're just trying to sell people a thing in the gospel and get them in a seat so they give. Now, tell us more about the heart of that, because so much of even what we're trying to emphasize today, I believe that heart was there in the beginning of what I know of many in relationship of people in the Willow Creek leadership.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just for context, I was there 1999 to 2006. I would call those the rocket ride years at Willow, where all kinds of things were happening. The world was coming to Willow at that point to learn how to do church better, because so many things were happening well there. The way the model worked, just for folks who may not be familiar, is that Sunday morning was an evangelism time. It was the outreach event of the week, and it was actually Saturday night and Sunday morning were evangelistic services, or they called them seeker services. And then Wednesday night was a disciple-making service, where you did Bible exposition and deeper training and all those kinds of things. So people at Willow basically said, we're going to give up our Sunday mornings in order to reach the lost, and also come on Wednesday nights in order to grow as disciples. Sometimes it got critiqued by people from outside of Willow because they would say, hey, the attractional model just waters down the gospel, and Sunday morning is always really simple, and it creates very shallow disciples and all of those kinds of things. But what they forget is that it was moving from a one-service model to a two-service model. And Willow was doing as good a job as anybody. I would say I'd put their new community services on Wednesday and Thursday nights up against anybody's in terms of caliber of worship and content of Bible teaching and the fantastic things. So they were doing a great job, or we were doing a great job of making disciples, not just making converts. And what they had done that was unique, I think, is Sunday morning is set aside for people who are non-believers, because it was working. Because they would see, at one point, let's say 17,000 people on a Sunday morning, 8,000 people would come back on a Wednesday and Thursday night. And group life was thriving, and it was a very high commitment environment. And for me, it was a really healthy environment. I know that there's a lot of different people who will give their varying perspectives there, but it was a high excellence, high speed, high adrenaline kind of Christianity that really appealed to me. And because I'm a person who naturally makes good boundaries for my life, I never got sucked into a workaholism or anything like that. I just had fun on the job every single day. And we were baptizing 500 to 700 people every single year, and developing leaders and sending missionaries out to the ends of the earth and all the stuff that would be indicators of a healthy church. And it was very fun and very life-giving for me at the time. I know that there was some significant stuff that happened at the end of 2018, and some things that were out there that were really unhealthy behind the scenes. I would just say my experience was I didn't encounter that at all when I was there. I encountered a lot of spiritual health and vitality.
Well, thank you for the background and explanation on that. And I do think I want to push you just a little further, because I ran into, not as much today. It's amazing to me now, the younger generation is kind of reinventing the Gen Xers version of church. But even that statement of the weekend service, worship service, would be for you as a believer to bring your person who doesn't know Jesus yet to.
Yeah.
I ran into so much pushback on
Yeah.
that thought. It was a lot of, I think, what the American culture's become is it's become a lot of either or thinking, that it's either for the believer or for the lost person. And so I'm just wondering, how did you then and how do you today kind of, hey, this is a dynamic process. How did you keep yourself there? And it's not this, it's solely for the, and the term we would heard when the seeker term was around was, well, what about me? I'm a believer. What am I supposed to do on the week? Very consumeristic kind of
Right. That's right.
statement. So I just would like to hear how you kind of walk through that back then and how you see it now in leading a church.
Yeah, at the time, it was a matter of buying into the model that I was hired on the church to do. And so, we just had very frank conversations with people. If you want to grow in your faith, then come back for a small group and come back on Wednesday nights, and that's what's going to be helpful for you. If you want to reach your lost friend, bring them along with on a Sunday morning, and that's the best time to do that. Interestingly, people have biblical arguments about this, but this is the way the apostles did it, is that they met in the temple courtyards, in Solomon's porch, in public with people on Sunday morning, celebrated the resurrection, and people were attracted and came all the time. And then they went house to house for their community gatherings. So if you say, hey, what's the most biblical model? Well, actually, Sunday morning outreach is the most biblical model. Now, coming here to Christ Community, of course, I came into an 85-year-old historic Christian Missionary Alliance church that was very used to, believers on Sunday morning. And my goal was to expand the view of Sunday morning and say, look, we can create messages that are fantastic to help believers grow and fantastic to bring your lost friends into. And so we've developed a service where we say we're never going to dumb down the content, but we will make language choices that are inclusive of people that are outside of the faith. And then when we create applications, we have applications to say yes to Jesus for the first time or to take a next step in your spiritual journey. And our goal is to say, let's do both. Let's reach both audiences with the same service. At Willow, we had a 2-service model. At Christ Community, we have a 1-service model. I think you can be highly evangelistic with both models, but you just have to pick what you're going to do and do it really well.
I agree. And I think where I'm getting to in my older age is that the model isn't really the thing. It's really
right.
about the intent of the people and the leaders. It's not the model. And yet we
So
chase
true.
models so much. Anyway, Erin, I'll shut up because I know we need to be wrapping. So.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for just sharing so much good with us today for our listeners. To our listeners, I hope there's just a lot of practical nuggets kind of sprinkled throughout. And I just hope that you'll reflect on those. And just, I'm still reflecting about just the community of churches there in Omaha. That's pretty amazing. And Doug already said kudos to you guys, but I just want to echo that. Well done. That's pretty awesome.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. To our listeners, thanks so much for listening to the Intentional Churches podcast. I just want to say, if this podcast has been helpful to you, please leave us a rating and a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This just helps us a lot as we grow and try to reach new leaders. And don't forget, the Intentional Churches Conference is coming up April 29th and 30th. So make sure you visit intentionalchurches.com/podcast for all the details and to register there. We'll see you next time.